So we're going to talk about a few things here really quickly with this video. That is the greatest of the art academies, which was the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris. That was the one that everyone wanted to be. The greatest painter of the French Academy, which was William Bouguereau, very worth looking at. And then the downfall of the Academy, which really was part of the emerging new painters, the modern art movement that begins to take form with realism and then really takes shape with Impressionism, which we'll also talk about. So a few things going on today, so buckle up. We're going to try to make this as quick as possible. Now, like I said, the French Academy in Paris, the Académie des Beaux-Arts, the Academy of Fine Arts, was the queen of the art academies. And this is where the greatest art show in the world was held every year, called the Salon, the annual Salon show, where paintings were hung floor to ceiling in this big space, several spaces. And if you were an artist, you really wanted to get into this show. It was very important. If you could get into the Salon show of the Académie des Beaux-Arts, it could change your career. You would get important commissions, you would get exposure and publicity. And so this was a big deal. The greatest painter of the French Academy at that time, the 19th century, was William Bouguereau. And William Bouguereau balanced all of these styles, I think, that had come before. He believed in emotional content to his paintings, but was also a very careful draftsman, very clear and realistic. And he famously said that line and color are the same thing. He really tried to undo this ancient sort of squabble between intellect and emotion. And he wanted to balance those in his work, and he did. A very brilliant painter, and someone very worth looking at. He did fall prey to some of the excesses of Victorian tastes and academic taste, but he was the powerhouse, the one that everyone wanted to paint like at the time. William Bouguereau. So here's what happens. Every year at the Salon show, there are a number of works that are rejected, of course, if you can't get into the show. In 1863, there were a lot of works rejected, and a lot of them were by these new painters, these realist painters, members of the Barbizon school who were painting kind of in an impressionistic way, though it wasn't called that yet. There were some important works and painters that were rejected. And their patrons, their supporters, thought that this was really out of line. And so there were a lot of complaints. So these complaints eventually reached the ears of Napoleon III, who was, I guess, the French premier or president or emperor or whatever at that time. And though he had very traditional tastes too, he also understood public sentiment and wanted the people to be happy. So he announces, we're going to have a separate show. We're going to have another show for all of these refused paintings. And so they did, and they called it the Salon de Refusés, the Salon of the Rejected. And what no one expected was that this show would end up being so popular, more popular than the regular Salon show. Now, some of the works that were rejected for this show were by Edouard Manet, Claude Monet, the great impressionist, members of the Barbizon school, like I said, Gustav Courbet. And so these painters are especially known for being rejected that year. But the one that really sort of gives you a sense of the mood of the time is the Luncheon on the Grass by Manet. So Manet's painting is, to us, maybe it doesn't look that different than a lot of the academic paintings. Nude figures were just a fixture. You saw a lot of nudity in the paintings. But this one's different. At the time, this was a very controversial painting, very scandalous, because this nude figure of the woman is being presented along with men sitting around in contemporary modern clothes, right? So it's not a historical painting or a mythical painting or anything like that, in a public park. And so this would be basically like a picture of you and your friends having a picnic in the park, and one of you is naked. This painting in particular gets a lot of attention for having been rejected. And of course it gets a lot of attention in the new Salon de Refusé show. Remember, this is 1863. So this show is very, very popular. People flock to see it. Most of them kind of to gawk and see what all the fuss is about. Some of them actually to make fun of the paintings. But not everyone. A lot of people are seeing this new work and really thinking that it deserves some consideration. They're interested and maybe excited about the new directions that art is going to take. And there's a sense too that the old academic approach is simply out of touch with the new emerging modern world. The grand history painting and the people in togas and the metaphorical works and things like this that are just very kind of stuffy and old-fashioned. And so they embrace this new direction that art is taking. And from then on, the art academies begin to lose influence. And by the beginning of the 20th century, they are really not a major force. There are many, many new modern art movements taking shape in the early 20th century. Art galleries and collectors and art critics are really setting the art market, and the art academies have pretty well dwindled to nothing. And so this also encompasses William Bouguereau's career. He's very popular and influential in the middle of his career. As time goes by, he finds it harder and harder to find collectors or to find students. And so by the end of his life, he is teaching smaller and smaller classes. And by the time he dies in 1923, he's considered sort of a historical footnote, a relic from a bygone age. And by the time I went to art school in the 1980s, his name wasn't even mentioned in textbooks, which is a shame because he's a brilliant painter. Now the Impressionists, like Claude Monet, and Manet is considered an Impressionist too, though he's really not. A lot of these painters went on to gain more and more prominence. The first Impressionist show, big exhibit of their own, is in 1874, which is also the year G.K. Chesterton was born. So he sees a lot of the changes in art happening during his lifetime. And so these movements really gain prominence more and more in the public mind. One painter we should talk about a little bit is John Singer Sargent. John Singer Sargent comes along right as Impressionism is taking hold, and he really balances so many of the concerns of Impressionism and academic art, all of the strengths of both of them. But because of that, he's sort of considered an outcast in both camps. He's too impressionistic for the academic painters. He's too academic for the Impressionists. But he is, I think, the most brilliant painter of that time. And because he is balancing all of these different concerns in his work in a way that is very powerful and evocative. And in fact, he's still a huge influence on painters, even today, who look at his work and see something really extraordinary. So John Singer Sargent, you should look at his work, but more than that, you should look at this PBS documentary about Sargent. I haven't asked you to watch many full-length documentaries, but this is one that I would have shown you in class anyway. It's about an hour, it's from PBS, well worth watching. And it covers, again, his career, which is in a way similar to Bouguereau's career. He's extremely popular at one point, and by the time he dies, he's considered sort of a relic. But interest in John Singer Sargent's work has come back in a really big way in the last couple of decades, and I think he's being recognized now as the master that he was. So that has brought us to the end of the art academies, right around the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. They're about done. And so we're going to be looking the rest of the semester at the Impressionists, a little bit at photography too, maybe, and that's how we'll wrap up the year. So go back and look at all of these posts about academic art, make some notes, use these as a way of reviewing, right? Go back and watch these videos, apply yourself to the study guide, which you should have, and I'll post that again as well in an email. So God bless you all. I'll talk to you soon.